Alright, in this video, we are going to go through the different types of eviction notices that you can use in an eviction and a few things that you need to know that you need to do and things you need to avoid doing. The first thing you need to know is you cannot intentionally exclude or lock out a tenant from the property in any way without a court order. This includes taking steps like turning off water, power, or gas. You must serve a notice and you must go through the court process before removing your tenant from the property. The second thing you need to know is that leases can be written or verbal contracts. And the third thing you need to know is you must know whether the law calls for calendar days or business days. Different types of notices use different methods of counting. If you use the wrong one or do not specify, then you are not strictly complying with the statute, and you will not be able to evict the tenant or occupant. Also, when counting the day you serve the eviction notice, it is considered day 0 and is not included in the number of days allowed by the notice. To evict a tenant, a landlord must serve the tenant with a notice to vacate. You need to choose the right notice for your situation. This notice must be in writing and strictly comply with statutory requirements. If the tenant remains in possession of the premises after receiving and failing to comply with the notice to vacate, then they are in unlawful detainer. The first notice is a 15-day notice to vacate. This notice can be used to end a tenancy that does not have a set end date. This can include a tenancy that goes from month to month or some other rental period. The landlord does not have to have a reason for wanting the tenant to vacate. The notice must be served at least 15 days before the end of the rental period. Otherwise, the tenant can stay until the end of the next rental period. If the rental agreement requires that more than 15 days notice be given, the landlord must give the longer notice required by the agreement. The notice orders the tenant to move out by the end of the rental period. It does not have to give them any other options. As you can see, there's an example of a notice in the PowerPoint, and you should receive a packet with a link to find all of the following notices. This notice is a 3-day notice to pay or to vacate. This notice is used if the tenant owes rent or other money. This notice tells the tenant they have 3 business days to pay all of the money listed on the notice or move out. It must give the tenant the option to pay all of the money. If the tenant pays all of the money, then they can stay in the residence. There is a portion of the CARES Act that is still in effect in regards to housing. It requires that you give a 30-day notice to vacate along with a 3-day notice to pay or vacate for certain covered dwellings. Those covered properties can include landlords that are mortgages that are backed by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. You really should speak to an attorney to see if your property falls within the covered property portion. If you're receiving federal funds, there's a high likelihood you are a covered property. This notice is for a 5-day notice to a tenant at will. An at-will tenant is someone that does not have a rental agreement, either in writing or orally. These situations may occur if there's a guest who refuses to leave, the rental agreement has expired and the landlord has told the tenant that the contract will not be renewed, or a new owner has purchased the property through bankruptcy, foreclosure, sheriff's sale, um, any of those type of situations. This also could happen if you're inheriting a home through the estate process. This notice is a 3-day notice to vacate for committing criminal acts on the premises. This notice would be used in a situation where a criminal act happened on the premises. Only use this criminal act on the premises notice if the action did not rise to the level of a nuisance. If the criminal activity affected a neighbor or other people on the property, you should use a nuisance notice instead of the committing criminal act on the premises notice. This notice is a 3-day notice to vacate for a lease violation which cannot be brought into compliance. A landlord will need to read their lease and see if a violation is possible within their lease that cannot be brought into compliance. This provides 3 calendar days, and once those calendar days have expired, the tenant should have left or will be considered an unlawful detainer. The 3-day notice to vacate for engaging in unlawful business on or in the premises of the landlord's property provides for 3 calendar days, as you can see on the PowerPoint here. Again, this is a situation where you would only use this if the business wouldn't be classified as a nuisance to other tenants on your property. You would use this if the business is affecting other individuals on the property. It is recommended that you use the nuisance notice instead of the unlawful business notice. Again, this is where we always highly recommend raising the specifics of your situation with an attorney so they can help you navigate these notices. A 3-day notice to vacate for committing waste on the premises is another 3 calendar day notice. You may be thinking, well, what is waste? Waste is harm to the residents. It can be physical harm, failure to maintain the property, or a failure to do something that the tenant has said that they would do. Um, some situations may arise like a failure to pay taxes. If that's something you've agreed to under the lease that a tenant will do. This notice is used if the tenant is damaging or has damaged the property, but not necessarily rising to the level of a nuisance. Again, this is where you would want to speak to an attorney to see if a nuisance notice would be more appropriate than a waste notice. A 3-day notice to vacate for assigning or subletting contrary to a rental contract is used if the tenant has allowed someone else to live in the property in violation of the rental contract. This notice orders the tenant to move out within 3 calendar days, and it does not give them any other options. Going through the other notices, we have spoken of this notice before. This is the 3-day notice to vacate for nuisance. This is a 3 calendar day notice. This is a major notice. We have a video dedicated strictly to what a nuisance is. Briefly, This notice is used if the tenant is creating a nuisance. A nuisance is something that interferes with someone else's comfortable enjoyment of their life or property. It can include anything that injures health, is indecent, offensive to the senses, or interferes with someone's free use of the property. There are two types of nuisance. There's either criminal nuisance or non-criminal nuisance. No matter what type of nuisance, the notice gives the tenant 3 calendar days to move and does not give them any other options. And so different examples of this would be like disturbing other tenants, having parties, smoking, buying and selling illegal drugs, gambling, weapon violations, things of that nature. And so if you have more questions about what a nuisance is, please watch our nuisance video. It goes in detail of what could constitute a nuisance on your property. Here is the 3-day notice to vacate for the criminal nuisance that I mentioned earlier. This is again 3 calendar days. So different examples of a criminal nuisance would be committing a felony, committing a criminal act causing damage or loss to a tenant's property or a landlord's property, drug or gang-related criminal acts, threatening violence against any tenant or a property manager, leasing agent, something of that nature is what you would consider when giving a 3-day notice to vacate for criminal nuisance. This is a 3-day notice to comply with their lease or vacate. Gives you 3 calendar days for the tenant to bring whatever lease violation into compliance. You'll see these a lot with tenants that may be using a balcony for storage when they shouldn't be, for leaving trash around the property, things like that. When you read your lease and there's a violation, if it's something a tenant can fix, this is the type of notice that you would serve, giving them the time to comply with the lease. This slide is very important. As mentioned earlier, there's different verbiage you have to use for different notices regarding calendar days or business days. A calendar day is just any typical day. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday is a calendar day. And so when you're counting 3 calendar days or 15 calendar days, you just count whichever day comes after the next. Business days has to be a business day. Think whenever the bank's open, that counts as a business day. So you wouldn't count weekends in that. If there's a holiday, something of that nature, it is not a business day. And so it's important, if you want to move forward with your eviction, to make sure your notice strictly complies with what type of day a tenant gets. Here on this slide, we've listed which notices use calendar days. Again, make sure you double check your notice before you serve it. Does it say properly if it's calendar day or business day? And lastly, these are the notices that you'll need 3 business days. Mostly non-payment of rent is the big one. And so if you're trying to evict your tenant for not paying rent, please be sure to double check and make sure you give them 3 business days in order to fulfill your duty to strictly comply with the law. Thank you.